Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit about some of the problems with Westside barbell for raw lifters, and I think this needs to be highlighted when you have guys like AlphaDestiny who are essentially promoting their own version of Westside Lite, and that is essentially what he's doing for people who are unaware of that. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And what I want to state is Westside, or the conjugate method for equipped powerlifters, is actually a fantastic training setup. It's fantastic. It's produced a lot of champions. It's produced plenty of world record holders. It works. It absolutely works. I don't think you can deny that. The problem we have is a lot of the stuff that Dan Green pointed out years ago in his article West of Westside, that all this focus on accommodating resistance, bands, chains, partials, all of that, it doesn't carry over particularly well to your raw lifts. And it has to do with just understanding things like joint angle specificities. But your real problem with Westside is that you don't do your classic lifts. And yeah, they do promote just getting strong in general, but they are still getting strong at movement patterns, and oftentimes movement patterns that accommodate their lifting suits. So it's not necessarily just getting all around strong. And for those unfamiliar, Westside uses a concurrent form of periodization to where you usually have like a squat and a deadlift based day. Actually, they count the good morning as a primary exercise, along with a bench press oriented day. Each one 2 days a week, and one day you do max effort work, and then the other days you do either dynamic effort work or the repetition method. Now, the dynamic effort is what they focus on more than the repetition method most of the time, but that varies. What you do find, though, is that people who compete raw, who do use variations of this system, usually focus more on the repetition method. And in my observation, those who are more successful at it, that's what they end up doing. So they turn it into a slightly more classic concurrent periodization. And they don't always rotate the exercises as much. Now, a lot of people will look at that and notice that what they do, they rotate primary exercises. So their max effort day is technically detrained maxes. In other words, Louis Simmons has people never hit the same lift more than once every 6 weeks. You run it on a schedule, so you don't do it more than once every 6 weeks. So let's say for the chest, for your bench press, they might do a 1 board, a 2 board, a 3 board, a chain. They might do a reverse band and then a floor press. So those 7 and rotate through them and not once ever do a normal pause bench. And the reason they get away with hitting a max, a true max, because they don't do training maxes, they do legitimate competition psyched up maxes. The reason they get away with it is because they're detrained. In other words, they're going to be weaker than they would be if they were trained. And what I mean is, if you haven't trained the floor press and you come in and do the floor press and hit your max on it, you've been doing nothing but bench press, it isn't going to be your true max that you would have if you trained it for 3 weeks. You trained that lift for 3 weeks, you're going to be stronger on it. Your 1 rep max would be higher. So they're detrained lifts, and what they basically do, they track their detrained lifts to know where their raw strength is, or their base strength at any given time. So they're hitting maxes all the time, but they're not trained maxes, so their neuromuscular efficiency is lower because they don't know the movement patterns. And you can get away with this. You can get away with it the way that they do that, and I understand why they do it, is to get around the law of accommodation, and then they run their second day, they're either dynamic or repetition into 3-week waves, where they change that every 3 weeks. What I would suggest to people, though, if you wanted to run a variation of this, you're going to have more focus on full range of motion exercises, classic lifts, less of the accommodating resistance. That's what actually makes it terrible for raw lifters. I know because I ran a 12-week block of the conjugate method years ago while I was on YouTube, when I was getting ready thinking of doing some single ply. Instead, I went back and decided to do raw and didn't compete with any equipment. And I noticed all my lifts went down. My bench press and my squat both went down. My deadlift actually did great. It went up. But I was doing a lot of speed pulls without bands or anything from the floor. And I was doing a lot of rowing and other stuff, and even box squats. Box squats will carry over to your deadlift. So I noticed that my bench and my squat both went down while running it, even though I got stronger at all of the Westside type lifts, all of the accommodating resistance stuff. I got stronger at all of it. It didn't carry over. So what you see, though, you see guys like AlphaDestiny and people like, yeah, but look, didn't he build a big bench press? That stuff didn't help his bench. You want to know why he built, in my opinion, a big bench press? Besides his leverages, you need to keep that in mind. He's a very short guy with short arms, doesn't train legs. That's why his bench per pound of body weight is fantastic. Below average leg development for his size. Got lean, and he's very, very short. You guys need to remember, weight classes are also disguised as height classes. It's the other way around, really. The shorter you are, the better you do at the lower weight classes. This is understood. There's physics behind it. There's biomechanics behind it. Most coaches understand this. He's way below average height, so that gives him an advantage in the lighter weight classes. And it's not to say his bench isn't good, because it is good. But he didn't build the bench using all that stuff, and people make that assumption that he did. He focused a lot on weighted dips, and he focused a lot on the overhead press. Now, the guy basically did a 225 push press, call it whatever you want, it was a push press, but a 225 push press while weighing under 200 pounds with a little bit of leg drive. Got his dips up to an enormous strength. That'll build your bench press. The problem is that the other stuff won't. All that band work, all that slingshot, reverse band, and chain board work, all that stuff he did, that doesn't build a raw bench press because it doesn't build your chest and your delts out of the bottom. It doesn't give you the strength out of the bottom. Absolutely doesn't work. That is not why his bench was so good. Look at the other lifts he did that we know have full carryover. The dip, weighted dip, the press, right? Those have full carryover. He did those and got really strong at those on top of all this other silly stuff. This other silly stuff didn't carry over as much. It didn't contribute nearly as much. I can assure you of that as someone who understands how training works. But he still did it, and it was just extra training volume. But he did the other things, and then he started doing close grip pause bench. That will build your bench press tremendously. So he already built the muscular foundation, and most of it between the weighted dips, the overhead press, all that. Then he goes and does a bunch of close grip bench work. That's what actually got his bench up to where it was. It wasn't all the chains and the bands and all that other nonsense. And if you want evidence that his stuff didn't work, look at what happened with his deadlift. Years before he did this, he had hit supposedly, a 500 deadlift for 3 reps, right? He hit a 500 deadlift for 3 reps. Then he ran through all this Westside type stuff with all these reverse bands, changing it every week, did no squatting, did no conventional pulls from the floor, and then he failed all his deadlift goals. And I think that's something Alec over at Not Strong Enough pointed out. He pointed that out, that his deadlift programming was terrible. Now, can you build a deadlift off of rows and squats and things? Sure, that will actually build your deadlift, but he didn't do the squats. He just did accommodating resistance and partials on the deadlift and built all these really strong partial Jefferson deadlifts and reverse band deadlifts and rack pulls. Then when he went to go hit the deadlift goals that he claimed he was going to hit, which would have been some strength increase, because I mean a 500 for 3 guys, that means you're good for at least 550. He had that for years. He gained muscle, he gained strength on all these other lifts, gained muscle mass on his body, and his deadlift still didn't improve. Because when he went to pull 585, even with straps in sumo, he failed the lift. He failed it. So all of this other training, this accommodating resistance and partials that he threw in, didn't actually build his deadlift, did they? His deadlift didn't improve with years of doing that stuff and gaining muscle. So that's what we need to point out and use that as the example, because look, that lift didn't go up. The reason his bench did is because he did a lot of full range of motion heavy exercises, the overhead press, the dip, all of that. And then jumps in and takes the muscle and strength that he built off that and applied it specifically by doing a lot of close grip pause benching and things. That's what built it based upon those other exercises. All that other shit he did, honestly, probably gave him an inferior amount of his results in his chest and triceps and everything else, because that stuff doesn't work that well for what he was trying to do, which was a raw bench press, because it doesn't carry over the same. It doesn't build the muscles the same, particularly things like the pecs, which you need for a raw pause bench. Right? Your chest is what gets the weight started. So when you look at all of this, this is the real problem with Westside. It's not the programming. The programming itself for Westside actually will work very, very well for raw lifters, but the way that they go about doing it is set up so much for equipped lifting that guys who are just trying to get big and strong, you're going to find that it's the exercise selections themselves that they do are the problem. It's not the programming. The actual concurrent periodization, the way they do it, actually works. It's the exercise selection that's a problem that makes it an issue for raw lifters. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.